Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into the life of a man who genuinely moved both Earth and people, R.G. LeTourneau.
He's one of those figures, isn't he? Whose
Hmm.
story sounds almost, well, too incredible to be true. A real force of nature,
Yeah,
driven by this unique blend of mechanical genius, unwavering faith, and just sheer stubborn persistence.
absolutely. And we're going to explore that incredible journey based on a stack of sources, mostly biographical accounts, that give us a window into what made him tick.
Right.
Our mission in this deep dive, to pull out the essential moments, the key insights that connect his, well, challenging beginnings to his transformation into this pioneering industrialist,
Hmm.
someone who saw his entire business as a direct partnership with God.
And that idea that business is a divine partnership, it's really the thread. It runs through his whole life, shaping everything from his innovations to his relationships. It's fundamental.
So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Robert Gilmore LeTourneau was born November 30th, 1888. His parents, Caleb Thucydides and Elizabeth Johnston Lorimer, they married on Christmas Day in 1881.
Right. And they eventually moved from Quebec down to Duluth, Minnesota. And his mother, Elizabeth, she sounds like she was just a pillar of strength.
Yeah,
The sources mention her favorite phrase quite a bit. Whatsoever state I am in, therewith I'll be content.
that kind of steady spirit. Wow, must have been invaluable, especially with a growing family.
Oh, for sure. Their home in Lester Park, Duluth, it became quite full. Eventually 5 boys and 3 girls. Sounds like it was a place with room for them to roam. Plenty of fishing, swimming, hunting opportunities.
But life wasn't always easy, particularly young Robert's relationship with his father, Caleb. There was frequent conflict, even over simple things.
Like carrying water or chopping wood.
Exactly. He specifically recalls one time cutting up perfectly good fence posts for firewood, which, well, you can imagine, didn't go over well at all. He talks about feeling unfairly treated, which even led him to try running away once. Only a heavy snowstorm stopped him.
Huh.
But interestingly, he says that actually led to a kind of reconciliation, at least over the chore situation. Shows this complex dynamic between them, doesn't it?
It really does. And school. School was another significant challenge for him. He skipped the 6th grade.
Yeah, skipped 6th, landed in 7th feeling completely lost, like the biggest kid, and he felt the dumbest kid in the class.
Oh, it's tough.
Developed a real inferiority complex and genuinely hated school.
Yeah, that feeling can stick with you. And his early jobs didn't offer much relief either, did they?
No, he got fired twice from his paper route by his boss, Pinky, and his father's reaction.
Let me guess. Not sympathetic.
Not at all. Told him he'd have to cut wood to make up the difference. Zero coddling there.
And then there's that dramatic incident early on. The swimming hole.
Oh yeah, jumped into a rock-filled spot thinking it was deep enough. Hit his head, a severe injury. Needed 16 stitches. He carried that scar his whole life, apparently visible when he later went bald.
16 stitches. And his father's response to that.
Brutal. Only fools jump in where angels fear to tread. He said that comment actually hurt him more than the physical injury itself.
Wow. You could just see how these difficult early experiences, conflicts, the school struggles, those harsh words, they really built a certain kind of resilience, didn't they? Even if it was painful at the time.
Absolutely. They definitely shaped his perspective and I think his determination later on.
So how did he transition from those challenging
Huh.
beginnings into the working world? What was the path?
Well, it started with hard physical labor.
Right.
Really hard. He did construction work with his father and brothers in those freezing Duluth winters.
It must have been brutal.
Oh, absolutely. But it seems to have given him a new appreciation for his father's own struggles, maybe seeing what he went through.
And then family made a big move, right, to Portland, Oregon. Yeah, prompted by a letter from a friend. It talked about year-round outdoor construction work, giant roses, which is a funny detail, a booming economy, and a shortage of carpenters. The
Wow.
classic Go West story almost.
He notes his parents' kind of serene acceptance of this huge change, while his own immediate concern was much more, well, relatable.
What was that?
Realizing his hand-me-down coat from his brother Bill was now 4 inches too short at the wrist.
Huh. Just shows how personal details often stand out in those big life moments, doesn't it?
Totally. His first proper job in Portland was in an iron foundry, and the foreman, Mr. Hill, hired him with a rather blunt assessment.
Oh, yeah.
This is a job for a strong back and a weak mind.
Ouch. What was the job?
Shoveling sand. But LeTourneau, he said he learned 2 priceless lessons on that job.
Okay, what were they? From shoveling sand.
One was about efficiency from using a file. The foreman told him, take a long stroke, use the whole thing, both ends and the middle. It's a simple analogy, but one he'd apply to really complex problems later.
Interesting. And the other?
Just finding quicker ways to do any job, generally stepping along faster, being more productive.
Makes sense. He describes his hands swelling to the size of hams from the shoveling. But he also learned this kind of physical paradox,
Which was?
that pushing a wheelbarrow could wear you out, but shoveling could actually relax those same muscles.
Yeah.
An interesting observation born from just hard physical toil.
The foundry itself sounds intense, melting tons of iron daily for castings, things for sawmills, freight car wheels, steamboats.
Busy place. He even witnessed a dangerous pour explosion.
Yeah.
Molten metal hitting wet sand creates chilled shot, he called it.
And guess who got blamed?
Let me guess.
The apprentice.
Yep. Blamed for putting too much water in the sand.
Of course. But this period also introduced him to something that would become absolutely crucial later on: welding.
Right. He first saw it while cleaning lead plates at a power plant. A dirty, dangerous job, lead dust. No masks back then. But he was fascinated by the lead burner and his oxyhydrogen torch. He wanted that job, didn't he?
Yeah.
He learned that lead burning wasn't just technical skill. It required this, instinct. Knowing the exact split second the lead was about to become liquid.
And his first attempts.
Gaping holes, according to him.
Yeah.
It just highlights the very hands-on, intuitive nature of the skills he was picking up along the way. Trial and error.
He bounced around other jobs too: bricklaying, learning about mortar and concrete, and even mining.
Mining, really?
Yeah, I learned about geology and dynamite. And he said that experience, who knew, actually came in handy much later when he was involved in building a highway for the Boulder Dam project.
Wow, you never know what experience will be useful. And despite hating school, he was clearly driven to learn, just on his own terms.
Absolutely relentless. While working on some venture involving a gold mine and farming, he took 4 correspondence courses in automobile mechanics.
4 courses while working like that.
Yep. Woke up at 4 a.m., studied by lantern light, worked out this demanding schedule.
Yep.
Chop wood, study, chop more wood. That was his routine.
That's dedication.
He was so dedicated, he proudly gave himself his own degree, the BM degree, Bachelor of Mechanics.
He conferred it himself.
After taking apart and completely reassembling a motorcycle in a single day, that tells you everything about his drive and his hands-on learning style, doesn't it?
It really does. But even with that self-taught knowledge and dedication, finding actual mechanical work wasn't easy for him.
No, he struggled. Finally got a job tending stationary gasoline engines for a bridge crew. This was around 1909. And he describes construction work back then as just brutal man-killing, he called it.
Yeah, you hear stories.
He talks about the admiration they had for steel hangers who had 3 years' experience. Not necessarily for their skill, for his survival. Just surviving the job for 3 years was impressive.
Wow, that really paints a picture of the conditions he was working in. And maybe why he later became so obsessed with building machines that made the work easier and safer.
Exactly. So after that bridge job finished, he landed in Stockton, California. It was kind of a random decision, just staying the night.
And that led to a job.
Yep, as the nightman at a garage. Jensen and Cap. Initially, his main duty was just answering the phone, towing cars. They specifically told him he won't have to be doing any repair work.
Famous last words for someone like him, I bet.
Totally. With his mechanical mind, he couldn't help but notice why cars were breaking down so much at night. Often, it was poor gasoline quality, rust in the fuel tanks. Simple stuff, but recurring.
And he used his skills to promote the garage in some pretty unconventional ways, right?
Oh, yeah. Like racing a Regal car up and down stairs at the county fair.
Yeah, why?
To get attention, because no one else would risk it. He figured it would make people notice the Regal in the garage. He even suggested challenging a Buick later, figuring even if they lost to the pros, they'd still beat Buick. Bold.
That's certainly one way to advertise. But this period also saw a major physical setback for him, a serious accident.
Yeah, while testing a Saxon car on an auto track in 1912, he crashed, badly broke his neck. And the medical treatment sounds absolutely harrowing. He describes a rope arrangement that was first cousin to a hangman's noose. Doctors struggled. His head was just limp. One remarked he looked like a chicken trying to put its head under its wing.
Oh, my goodness.
He eventually found help from a bone specialist in San Francisco who used this, really harsh manipulation that actually worked. But the experience led LeTourneau to vow never to go to a doctor again unless he was literally carried in.
A dramatic vow. Did he stick to it?
Mostly, though he admits he had to break it occasionally later in life, but the accident left a lasting physical mark. His head would apparently list to starboard a little, as he put it, after a long day.
Wow. And it was after this, while recovering, that he moved in with his uncle Bob Gilmore in Stockton. And that's when he met Evelyn Peterson.
Right. Uncle Bob was a blacksmith, also from Duluth originally,
Mm-hmm.
and Evelyn's father, Oscar Peterson, owned the draying company where Uncle Bob worked. Small world connection.
So Robert and Evelyn connected deeply, but her father wasn't keen.
No, Mr. Peterson insisted he wait 5 years for her to come of age before they could marry. They decided they didn't want to wait that long.
Uh-oh. What did they do?
They planned an elopement, drove down to Tijuana, Mexico, taking back roads, got married within an hour in a civil ceremony.
Just like that.
Just like that. But their planned honeymoon in Lower California got cut short real fast.
Why?
They found out Mr. Peterson had filed a kidnapping charge against Robert.
Kidnapping. Wow. So they had to race back to Stockton.
Yep. It took Evelyn herself convincing the district attorney that she absolutely had not been kidnapped to clear up the whole legal mess.
Incredible. Did they eventually reconcile with her father?
They did, but it took 7 years. Definitely a dramatic start to their marriage.
No kidding. Then World War I comes along.
Right. LeTourneau felt compelled to contribute. He saw it as a righteous fight, he said, and decided to work for the Navy at Mare Island Navy Yard. Initially, he wanted to work directly on warships, but they put him in the shop. He managed to get transferred to the electrical department, though, with help from a chief electrician.
And that experience was important, wasn't it?
Hugely important. Working there, he didn't just see himself, winding coils or hooking up generators. He felt like he was building a battleship. He tried to understand the whole system. He viewed the whole place as one big electrical laboratory.
That focus on understanding the entire system, not just the individual parts, that's a theme we see pop up again and again with his later innovations, isn't it?
Absolutely. But then tragedy struck Mare Island. The 1918 Spanish influenza epidemic hit hard.
And LeTourneau got it.
Got it bad. Became severely ill. He described being sick and alone for 3 days, recounts this powerful scene in a crowded hospital room where a doctor actually thought he was about gone.
Wow. But he pulled through.
Doctor saved him that time. But the medicine they gave him had this really strange side effect. He said he sweated profusely for over a year whenever he lay down. Weird.
Very strange.
And despite his general reluctance towards doctors after the neck injury, he fully admitted they saved his life then.
Sometimes you have to break those vows.
Right. He also shares a surprising coincidence from this time. Evelyn's friend, Carolyn Jones, turned out to be married to his San Francisco friend, Elmer Jones.
No way.
Yeah, he said it could have knocked me off the Christmas tree. Small world indeed.
So after the war, LeTourneau's 30 years old, and he makes this really pivotal decision, one that seems, on the surface anyway, completely irrational.
What did he do?
He sold his half of the garage business to his partner, Parks, for $5,000 cash,
Okay.
which left him unemployed and $5,000 in debt.
Wow. That's not a great position to be in. Unemployed and in debt.
Not at all. A
Yeah.
real low point financially. He sort of stumbled into earth moving almost by accident, got a job repairing a Holt tractor at Whitehall Ranch,
How did that come about?
ran into a friend, Ira guy, on the street who told him about it, said it was a job good enough to pay my debts. Just what he needed.
So he shows up in his little yellow Saxon car.
Right. And the rancher, a guy named Grunor, actually mistakes him for the famous Mr. Holt himself. Starts calling him Mr.
Ah. Did he fix the tractor?
He did. Welded a broken bolt on the timer, dealt with rust from the fuel tank,
Mm-hmm.
got it running.
Okay, so a small success. But his very next venture, not so much.
No, that one was a disaster. He took a contract to lay 4,000 feet of cement pipe, expected a nice profit.
Ah.
The California sun, it dried out the top of the pipe faster than the bottom cured in the moist soil. Result, leaks everywhere.
Oh no, how did he fix them?
With incredible difficulty. Had to get down in the ditch, under the hot sun, punch holes in the pipe near the leaks, and pack cement in. Agony. He lost a whole month's work and $1,000 cash.
Ouch, that hurts.
He called that experience the first hard rule of contracting. The more you can make, the more you can lose.
A painful lesson.
And he said 4,000 feet of leaky pipe felt like the longest distance in the world. You can just feel the frustration. It really underscores the huge risks involved in that kind of work.
And it was right around this low point, financially and maybe emotionally, that he experienced a profound spiritual turning point.
Yeah, this seems really key. He went to a revival meeting, knelt alone, prayed.
What did he pray?
Something like, Lord, if you'll forgive me and help me, I'll do anything you want me to do from this day on. And he described feeling God's glory flood my soul. He knew, he said, that this was real.
Wow. And he talked to the preacher afterwards.
Yeah, Reverend Duvall, who told him something that really resonated. God needed businessmen just as much as preachers.
Mm.
And despite feeling like a complete failure at that point, LeTourneau decided, okay, if that is what God wants me to be, I'll try to be his businessman. He started seeing it as a direct partnership. He thought, how could I fail if God was truly his partner?
That conviction, that idea of partnership, it became his driving force, didn't it?
Absolutely. He kept contracting, took a land leveling job out on the islands with machinery that was mortgaged to the hilt. He got really frustrated with the scraper operator.
Oh, what was the issue?
The guy would only work 10 hours a day, period. Regardless of the need, the weather, anything. 10 hours and done.
Okay.
And that frustration led LeTourneau to do a lot of thinking while he worked, often right there from his thinking seat on the whole tractor.
And this is where things started to click, all those different experiences.
Exactly. His time at Mare Island, understanding DC motors and generators, remembering Hank Rogers' electric car starter, at both ends of the file, efficiency principle from the foundry.
It all came together.
Yep. He got the idea, put a generator on the tractor's flywheel, run power back to an electric motor on the scraper. Meaning one man could control both machines, operate the scraper controls right from the tractor seat. It was a direct application of that efficiency principle, work both ends of the process with just one person.
Brilliant. But did people immediately see the genius in it?
Not exactly. He faced resistance. He called it the man who isn't there theory. Employers looked at it and said, well, how can I justify paying for this expensive electric scraper if it gets rid of the scraper operator's salary? Where's the saving?
The lamer question.
Right. This really solidified his belief, though, that a man's worth isn't diminished by machines. It's increased because machines allow for higher production. In his view, machines raise the standard of living by making labor much more productive.
Amidst all these business struggles and innovations, they had a personal blessing, right?
Yes. Their daughter Louise was born in April 1920, and they kept their faith strong through it all, attending church, even managing to meet their pledges to the Christian Missionary Alliance, despite being really strapped for cash.
And then Carlton Case, the guy from the Leaky Pike disaster.
Yeah, surprisingly, despite that disaster, he offered them a house on Moss Avenue in Stockton. Nothing down, just $30 a month.
Wow. That must have been huge for Evelyn.
Oh, absolutely. After years living in rented rooms and construction camp cook shacks, it was her first real home. And for Robert, that property became the physical start of R.G. LeTourneau, Inc.
His barn was the machine shop.
An acre of land was the open-air factory and the dust in the driveway. That was his engineering department.
Love it. He said he didn't even realize for 5 years that he had actually started a big business. It just sort of happened.
And that first scraper he built himself. It wasn't exactly high-tech materials, was it?
Not at all. Literally welded together from scrap iron he'd collected over the years. Because he needed one for a contract, the Belaudet contract, and couldn't afford to buy one. Necessity. Pure and simple.
Necessity is the mother of invention. And the crucial insight for powering it came from an old electric car.
Yeah, he saw the motor in an old electric automobile and thought, that's it. That's the perfect power source for my scraper. He bought 2 old motors, welded them on, added gears and pulleys.
And just like that, he was firmly on the path to using electric power in heavy machinery, which was revolutionary at the time.
Totally. And the resulting all-welded scraper was a game changer. It was light because it wasn't made of massive, heavy cast iron.
Right, so its weight when loaded was mostly payload, not dead weight.
Exactly. The tractor barely felt it when it was empty. And because it was welded, no bolts or rivets to loosen up. The tough steel frame could absorb shocks and even flame-harden the blade so it could cut through rock.
But how did it perform compared to the conventional scrapers of the day?
Night and day. It moved 6 tons faster than the standard 4-yard machines, carried about 1/3 more per trip, made twice as many trips in the same time, and it reduced spillage significantly.
Wow. So it wasn't just a new design, it was a quantum leap in earth-moving efficiency.
Absolutely. It's such a great example of how his specific hands-on knowledge, combined with that willingness to just experiment and try things, led to genuine innovation that solved real-world problems.
That initial success, really born of necessity and ingenuity, it set the stage for everything that followed, didn't it? LeTourneau often reflected on that idea. The inventors build on the work of others, standing on the shoulders of giants, or at least previous discoveries.
Right. And he saw how new scientific advancements, things like fiberglass insulation later on, allowed for smaller, more powerful electric motors. That opened up entirely new possibilities in mechanics.
Like eventually getting motors compact enough to fit right inside a wheel hub, which is a huge development.
Huge. But after the success of that first scraper, he hit another snag. He struggled to sell his newfangled contraptions, as he called them.
So what did he do? He made another bold move, didn't he?
He did. Decided to become a full-time manufacturer by entering the heavy construction business himself. Basically, to prove his own machines worked in the real world.
He called himself a contractor to end all contractors.
Yeah, but he admits later that this pride crashed and burned. It sounds like taking on massive construction contracts just to demonstrate his machines was a much tougher game than he maybe anticipated.
And that led to another major turning point involving a very famous name.
Henry J. Kaiser, the industrialist. Kaiser bought him out completely, lock, stock, and barrel, LeTourneau said. Didn't even haggle over the price.
Why did Kaiser do that, do you think?
Well, LeTourneau later interpreted it through his faith lens. He realized Kaiser wanted his full energy directed onto Kaiser's jobs, not split between his own contracting efforts and manufacturing for Kaiser.
Ah, the focus thing.
Right. He connected it to the biblical principle of not serving two masters, God and Mammon. For him, it meant he couldn't effectively serve two factories, his own and Kaiser's. He needed to focus.
So Kaiser buys his contracting business, but then gives him manufacturing work?
Exactly. Kaiser offered him work building hoppers in his Stockton shop. That allowed him to return purely to manufacturing. And this is where another innovation was born, inspired by a specific problem.
Which,
Sticky Mississippi buckshot mud. It kept clinging inside the hoppers they were building.
okay, I can picture that being annoying.
His solution, a powered tailgate driven by an electric motor to push the sticky stuff out. And that idea evolved into the ram dump mechanism for his much larger scrapers, the ones that could handle massive loads, 150 tons or more. A simple, practical solution to a messy problem.
His factory operations were growing, but it sounds like they were still pretty chaotic, right? Back on Lost Avenue?
Oh, yeah. Improvised. Engineering was literally in a trailer in the yard. The business department was in the parlor of a house across the street.
And it smelled of garlic and spaghetti from the landlady's cooking.
That's the story. And Evelyn was always there bringing coffee at 2 a.m. for the crew working through the night. It paints this picture of a very hands-on, maybe slightly chaotic, but incredibly dedicated operation.
They faced huge backlogs, needed more machines, relied heavily on those subcontracts from Kaiser. He shares a story about another contractor, Buck Mustretti.
Right, losing his shirt on a highway job because he hit unexpected rock he hadn't budgeted for.
And LeTourneau notes how that foreshadowed a similar challenge he would face himself later on a very famous job.
Yeah, Boulder Dam. But before that, there's this really powerful story from the Newhall cutoff job in Southern California, a landslide.
Caused by cutting through unstable oil shale, right? Nearly buried his crew.
Nearly. But miraculously, he says, a power shovel had broken down just minutes earlier. This forced them to close that section of the cut.
So they weren't there when the slide hit.
Exactly. Saved everyone's lives. LeTourneau absolutely saw this as divine intervention. A miracle, he called it.
Wow. During this period of growth, his team really started to solidify, didn't it? He relied heavily on family members.
Yeah, the relatives, he affectionately called them. Filling key roles, Carlton Case handling contracts and legal stuff, Joe Harna and Johansson in the office, Vernon Love with machine tools, Warden Webster tracking equipment, Monty Newman overseeing jobs, Al Losh as the troubleshooter.
Elmer Isgrin developing things like sheepfoot rollers, Harry Andrews keeping the books. It was becoming a real organization, albeit family-centric.
With business booming, planning began for a new, much larger factory, triple the size.
And the design was revolutionary for the time, wasn't it? All steel, all welded construction.
Completely. The walls and roof weren't just covering, they were integral structural components. They helped support the cranes inside. This drastically cut the amount of steel needed and the construction time. Very innovative.
And the business numbers were looking good.
Harry Andrews, the bookkeeper, showed him the 1930 sales figures. $110,000 total, $34,000 profit. Significant growth.
Must have felt good.
It did. LeTourneau admits this success inflated his ego quite a bit. He prayed, promised God a better share, like a bigger tithe, the next year after they expanded. But he admits he failed to keep that promise then.
Shows that ongoing tension, doesn't it, between the business success and the spiritual commitment.
Definitely. And then a major crisis hit at the Orange County dam job. He was told he couldn't finish the crucial spillways before the rainy season hit,
Meaning?
meaning he'd have to shut down and wait a whole year, which threatened the very existence of RG LeTourneau Inc. They couldn't afford that delay.
Wow. And on top of that, he faced intense conflict with Mr. Hall from 6 companies, the main contractor for Boulder Dam, where LeTourneau also had work.
What was the conflict about?
Sunday work. Hall insisted LeTourneau work his crews on Sunday to meet schedules. But that violated LeTourneau's deep religious conviction about observing the Sabbath.
So a clash between business demands and faith principles. What did he do?
He prayed intensely and resolved to stand firm, even if it meant losing his company, losing the contract, everything.
Gutsy.
Mr. Hall actually arrived on site, prepared to take over LeTourneau's operation, checkbook in hand, ready to buy him out or kick him off.
Tense moment.
Incredibly tense. But after they talked, somehow Mr. Hall agreed. He let LeTourneau cash the progress payment check and continue observing Sunday rest for his crews.
Really? How did LeTourneau explain that?
He attributed it entirely to the power of prayer, believed God intervened directly.
That crisis was followed almost immediately by another one, right? With creditors?
Yeah, the company was heavily in debt. Creditors were ready to seize his machines. They called a meeting.
And LeTourneau
Stood defiant. He told them basically, go ahead, take the machines. I'll just open a shop on a vacant lot somewhere.
Yeah.
And work faster without the burden of debt holding me back. Bold strategy. Did it work? He also offered them notes secured by the company assets. His sheer determination convinced most of them to give him more time.
But the books were still a mess.
Oh, yeah. He brought in an accountant, a Mr. Frost, who was apparently horrified by the disorganized records and the mountains of unpaid bills. LeTourneau was actually ready to just give up, let the creditors take the machines.
But he didn't. Why?
He had another conversation with Reverend Duvall, who reminded him forcefully of his commitment, his partnership, his vow to be God's businessman.
That refocused him.
Completely.
Yeah.
He went back, took his machines off the auction block, faced the creditors again, repeated his vacant lot threat, offered the secured notes again.
And this time?
This time, they all agreed. And he says with God's help and maybe some frantic work, within a month, they were meeting payroll and their church pledges right on time, much to Mr. Frost's astonishment.
Incredible turnaround. It really shows how his faith wasn't just a private belief system. It directly impacted his business decisions, his risk-taking, and, in his view, the outcomes.
Absolutely. So he somehow overcame that massive debt, $100,000 he mentions, which was a huge sum back then, especially compared to what others might have owed.
He talks about his worries in the summer of 1932 being just immense, overwhelming, but how reestablishing his faith, that partnership idea, completely changed his perspective, made those worries seem almost foolish in hindsight.
He uses that great analogy, doesn't he, about the spinster who worried constantly about her hypothetical grandchild drowning in a well that didn't even exist yet.
Right. It highlights how faith, for him, provided this grounding, this perspective that helped him manage those potentially crippling worries.
He also reflected on what he called the vicious circle in big industry. You know, the difficulty selling machines that are unproven.
Right. Nobody wants to buy it until it's proven.
But you need mass production to get the price down.
And you need sales to justify mass production.
Exactly. It's a catch-22.
Yeah.
He felt that maybe his very ignorance of these conventional business barriers, or perhaps his willingness to ignore them, allowed him to just stick his neck out and try things that more established companies wouldn't dare.
Here's where things get really interesting. The true rubber-tired revolution begins. It started with a report.
Yeah, a report came in from a guy named Joe Salvador, who was working down near the Salton Sea using one of LeTourneau's early scrapers fitted with rubber tires instead of the standard steel wheels.
And what did Salvador report?
Something amazing. He said the rubber-tired scraper needed only 1/3 the drawbar pull, that's the force needed to pull the machine, compared to the identical steel-wheeled version.
1/3 the effort.
It rolled twice as fast.
Wow. So the implications.
Huge. This meant LeTourneau realized he could build scrapers 3 times bigger, carrying 3 times the load, pulled by the same tractor.
What was the principle behind it? Why were rubber tires so much better?
Flotation. Low-pressure rubber tires spread the machine's weight over a larger area. Instead of digging into soft soil and basically having to climb uphill constantly like heavy steel wheels did, the big rubber tires rolled smoothly over the surface. Much less resistance.
Okay, makes sense. But surely standard truck tires wouldn't last long on a rocky construction site.
Exactly. They'd get punctured constantly. So LeTourneau had this radical idea. Use giant, low-pressure tires, like the ones he managed to acquire from old airplanes.
Airplane tires. On earth movers.
Yeah. His concept was that these huge soft tires wouldn't try to climb over a rock. They would simply enfold it, wrap around it, absorb the impact,
Which would save power.
and prevent blowouts. When he took this idea to the big tire companies using their own engineering theories about deflection and contact area to explain it,
Yeah.
what was their reaction?
Let me guess. They thought he was nuts.
Pretty much, I was crazy, he said they told him. Dismissive.
But he pushed ahead anyway.
He did. And he made another fascinating discovery, kind of a side benefit.
What was that?
Operators actually took better care of the rubber-tired machines
Why?
because they were smoother, quieter. The operators weren't getting bounced around and rattled constantly like they were on the steel-wheeled behemoths. Operator comfort leading to better machine care and efficiency.
Exactly.
It led to increased loading efficiency, less aggressive handling, reduced wear and tear on the equipment, a totally unanticipated win-win.
And the results in terms of sales.
Explosive, just explosive. Total sales went from around $379,000 in 1933 to $929,000 in 1934, with a net profit of $340,000. His Stockton plants were completely overflowing. He describes the assembly lines as these labyrinths just winding through the facility. Couldn't keep up.
That kind of growth obviously meant they needed more space, which led to the big move in 1935.
Right, to Peoria, Illinois, a strategic location central for distribution across the country, and also, crucially, close to Caterpillar Tractor, which was a major player and, at that time, a key partner.
He bought land there, a circus lot.
Yeah, a 23-acre former circus grounds right on the Illinois River. What he didn't do initially, though, was check the flood stage history of the river.
Uh-oh.
Did that come back to bite him?
Oh, yeah. That oversight led to a lot of frantic work later, building extensive levees to protect the plant.
Their arrival in Peoria sounds like pure chaos.
It really does. They arrived in the middle of a 2-week rainstorm, had to build a railroad siding literally overnight using bulldozers and scrapers just to get materials in.
In the rain. In the pouring rain. Had to weld a crane together overnight just to unload machines onto high ground before the river rose further. And somehow, they still managed to build 13 scrapers that first month, literally working out in the rain and mud.
Incredible. You can just picture the scene. Pop Cook, one of his key guys.
Yeah, he famously remarked he just didn't want to lose his tools in the mud. Probably ankle deep out there.
It was in Peoria, though, that LeTourneau gave his first major public speech. And his core theme was already very clear, wasn't it?
Absolutely. He argued that Christian businessmen needed to do two things: support preachers financially and testify publicly that Christianity was the driving power of our business.
Why did he feel that public testimony was so important?
He felt it was essential to counter the doubters, the people who claimed religion was just all talk and no production. He wanted to show faith could be practical, powerful, results-oriented. Though he admitted after that very first speech, he felt he'd only sold himself, not the message effectively. He needed to get better at it.
This public platform, this speaking, it led him to reflect more deeply on his whole partnership with God idea, especially concerning tithing, giving money.
Right. He came to feel that believers today, living under grace rather than the Old Testament law, should actually give more than the legal 10% tithes required in the past.
Why more?
Out of sheer gratitude,
Yeah,
giving generously because of what God has already done for you, not out of obligation. That was his perspective.
And as a direct follow-up to that theme, that faith needed practical application in business and training.
He founded the LeTourneau Technical Institute right there in Peoria to train young men in mechanics and Christian principles simultaneously.
He also started a publication around this time, 1935, called Now.
Yeah, the name came from his conviction that action for the Lord shouldn't be put off, it should be now. It started simply as a plant paper. Had his column initially about welding techniques, personal items, and messages about faith.
And it grew.
Accidentally at first. A printer mistakenly ran off 1,000 copies instead of the planned 500. But they found unexpected demand for the extras.
Huh.
His brother-in-law, Tom Olson, became a key contributor, writing articles that tied current news events to God's message. And it just took off. Eventually reached over 600,000 readers worldwide. Incredible reach for a company paper.
He mentioned getting criticism, didn't he? For his writing style in those early columns.
He did. Said they were poorly written. But he felt that writing for, as he put it, a few 100,000 critical readers actually forced him to learn to write much more correctly over time. Another example of him learning and adapting, even very publicly.
Life wasn't all business and publishing, though. He faced another serious personal event in 1937. Another accident.
Yeah, a car accident this time. He was with two of his key team members, Bill and Norman Dirks. He believed he and Evelyn might not survive.
And he told Bill Dirks.
Instructed him to make sure their 6 children go through for God if he and Evelyn didn't make it. Shows where his ultimate priorities lay, even in a moment of crisis.
He survived but was badly injured.
Encased in plaster. But his focus, incredibly, remained on work. He actually designed a special stretcher so he could be wheeled through the factory on inspection tours while he was still laid up.
Wow. That's dedication or maybe obsession.
A bit of both, probably.
Yeah.
And this period also sparked another key innovation idea, something about the tractors pulling his machines.
Right, the prime mover concept. He realized his scrapers and other attachments had much more potential speed and efficiency than the tractors towing them could actually deliver.
The scrapers could handle maybe 20 mile per hour, but the tractors could only pull them at, 4 or 5 mile per hour.
Exactly, it was a bottleneck. It greatly limited the range and productivity of his machines on bigger jobs. He initially didn't want to compete directly with the tractor manufacturers like Caterpillar.
But he realized.
He realized that for his machines to reach their full potential, he had to provide the prime mover himself. He had to build the whole system.
Which set the stage for the LeTourneau and his later integrated designs. Then came World War II, and LeTourneau's machines played a massive role.
Huge. The bulldozer, in particular, was called the prime secret weapon by some.
Why was it so crucial?
The urgent need to build and repair air bases, often under combat conditions, was absolutely critical, especially in the Pacific and Europe. There were reports of Seabees and Army engineers building operational airfields faster than air squadrons could even occupy them.
And LeTourneau's equipment was key to that speed.
Absolutely. The speed, power, and ruggedness of his bulldozers, scrapers, and cranes were essential. During the war, he also built a new factory down in Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Using his welding expertise again, right? Built quickly.
Very quickly. Used thin steel plate, originally bought for prefabricated houses, welding it into a strong structure. The site was chosen strategically, too.
How so?
On the Mississippi River, ideal for shipping heavy machines directly overseas. And nearby hills provided perfect, challenging terrain for testing the equipment. Stories from the front lines must have been powerful motivators back home.
Oh, definitely. He mentions things like engineers using beach sand to build a runway on an 18-foot deep mud delta in North Africa under constant bombing raids. Or General Spaatz reporting the rapid construction of multiple air bases near Kasserine Pass after the battle there. Those stories really boosted morale and demonstrated the incredible impact of the machines.
Then the war ends, and the post-war era brings a whole new landscape, right?
Completely new. The nation's infrastructure, highways, airports, everything had deteriorated during the war years due to neglect and lack of resources. But the public demand wasn't just for repairs.
It was for
A complete remaking of the nation. Massive new interstate highway systems, modern airports, pipelines, reservoirs. The scale of the need caught the entire earth-moving industry almost completely by surprise.
But contractors were ready for change.
They were. Having seen the incredible feats of earth-moving during the war, many abandoned the old, slow, traditional methods. They were eager for new technology, and you had thousands of service-trained engineers returning home with practical experience using exactly this kind of heavy equipment.
Perfect timing for LeTourneau, in a way. But this is also when his relationship with Caterpillar changed significantly.
Yeah, that was a big shift. His turn-up-pull prime mover, the machine Caterpillar had initially kind of laughed at, had proven hugely successful during the war.
So Caterpillar
Developed their own versions of the self-propelled prime mover and scraper, and they ended their long-standing sales representation agreement with LeTourneau. They became direct competitors.
Wow. So suddenly he had no dealer network.
Pretty much, he was forced to build his own global sales and service network completely from scratch. A massive challenge, but also maybe an opportunity to have full control over his brand and distribution.
This need for expansion and control led to the establishment of the huge Longview, Texas site.
Right. 12,000 acres down there. Massive proving grounds for testing equipment under real conditions, and a state-of-the-art factory designed for maximum versatility. Lots of overhead cranes, jab cranes everywhere, so they could assemble different types of machines efficiently on the same lines. Plus, they built their own metallurgy lab and even a plate mill, so they could develop and produce special steel alloys quickly, right there on site. It was built for speed, flexibility, and innovation.
And Ellen, his wife, played an essential role there too, didn't she?
Absolutely. She was known as Mom to all the students at the LeTourneau Institute branch there. She also ran Camp Bethany, a Christian conference center on the property, all while raising their own children. She even oversaw the conversion of an old warehouse into a modern home for their family right there on the plant grounds.
A true partner in every sense. Now, one of the most powerful moments LeTourneau recounts happened not in a factory, but in Washington, D.C., praying.
Yeah, this is a pivotal story for understanding his later motivations. He was praying for guidance about global work, something he felt increasingly called to do, using his technology for more than just profit.
And he heard.
He describes hearing a wonderful and familiar voice, which he clearly identifies as God's telling him specifically to go to Liberia in West Africa.
Liberia.
Why Liberia? The voice, he said, called it the challenge of your life, the culmination, really, of what his partnership with God was truly about. Not just building bigger machines, but using them for a higher purpose, a global purpose.
So he went.
He did. And his visit to Liberia was eye-opening. He saw some really dismaying things: inertia, superstition holding people back, like babies starving right next to abundant banana trees because local beliefs forbade eating them.
That's heartbreaking.
But he also saw encouraging signs, great potential in the people and the land itself. It was a jungle country, desperately needed roads, railroads, cleared land for farming. Yet, ironically, it was importing basic lumber and couldn't even feed itself, despite having incredibly rich soil. It seemed tailor-made for his big land-clearing machines.
But he faced that conventional economic argument again, didn't he? The cost.
Oh, yeah. People said, look, your bulldozer costs $50 a day to operate. We can hire 100 native workers for 50 cents a day each. Your machines are too expensive.
How did he respond to that?
He argued that the comparison wasn't fair. The native labor was often malnourished, lacked proper tools, and didn't have much incentive for truly productive work under the existing systems. His firm belief, rooted in his faith, was that a Christian businessman owes God his best effort and should use the technology God enabled him to create to improve living standards globally.
He put it pretty bluntly, didn't he?
He did. He argued it would be unchristian not to use powerful machines to help people rise above suffering and starvation when you had the means. For him, technology wasn't separate from his faith. It was a tool for ministry, for practical help.
And this conviction led directly to the missionary project at LeTourneau, Liberia.
Exactly. He launched it with a whole shipload of heavy equipment and staff, including his daughter Louise and his son-in-law Gus Dick, heading up the team on the ground. Billy Graham himself came and gave the dedicatory prayer for the expedition before they left.
So what did they do there? Put his machines to work.
Right away. His massive jungle crusher, despite its enormous cost, cleared land efficiently but selectively, sparing valuable commercial timber while creating trails and opening areas for farming. His sawmill produced lumber, which was then hauled by another one of his inventions, a shallow draft freighter designed specifically for navigating Liberia's rivers.
And the results?
The cleared land quickly produced surplus food. They started planning for poultry farms, disease-resistant cattle farms. It was a holistic approach, using technology to address basic needs like food production, infrastructure, shelter.
But he anticipated people asking if this was just commercialism disguised as missions, right?
He did. He stated up front that the project was commercial in the sense that it aimed to become self-sufficient, hopefully profitable, so it could then fund similar projects in other developing areas. And yes, his machines used in the project would also be available for purchase by others in Liberia.
But he drew a distinction.
He emphasized that a regular businessman focused solely on quarterly profits couldn't possibly afford to tie up millions of dollars for years and years on such a long-term, high-risk project with uncertain financial returns. But, he said, God can, and as his helper I try to do his will, confident that he will help me be his businessman.
So he saw it simply as working out his faith partnership.
Exactly. Despite all the obvious challenges and complexities, he even noted there wouldn't be any fun in it if everything was easy.
He kept innovating, too, even for these specific challenging conditions. The tree stinger.
Yeah, another specialized machine, designed for felling massive jungle trees that were too big for saws and couldn't easily be handled even by the jungle crusher.
What was it?
An electric-wheeled machine with a powerful hydraulic pusher boom on the front and a big anchoring blade on the back to hold it steady, just shows his continuous drive to invent specific solutions for really difficult practical problems he encountered.
Then in 1958, his 5-year non-compete agreement with the company that bought his previous earth-moving business expired.
Right. And he was eager to get back into the earth-moving game properly, brimming with new ideas he'd been developing.
Specifically,
Electric wheels, not just on the prime mover, but on the scraper itself. So the scraper could actively pull with its own wheels while the prime mover pushed and pulled.
creating an all-wheel drive earth mover.
Essentially, yes, allowing for much greater traction and power, enabling him to design for massive 75-ton loads far bigger than anything before.
His later innovations weren't just earth-moving, though. Offshore platforms became a big focus.
Huge focus. He came up with some incredibly ingenious solutions for building stable platforms for oil drilling in deep, rough waters, like using a simple carpenter's plumb bob
A plumb bob. How?
as a center to detect even the slightest tilting of the platform as the massive legs were being lowered in treacherous currents. If it tilted, it would instantly trigger electric motors to adjust the legs and keep the platform perfectly level during the critical lowering phase. Simple, but effective.
Brilliant. He also planned platforms with legs that could spread out like a tripod for even greater stability, built in huge, prefabricated, welded sections. Always thinking bigger, stronger, more stable.
He was often asked, how did you know if you had a good idea? How did you pick the winners?
And his answer?
He was pretty humble about it, admitted he didn't always know right from the start if something would work, but he said his successful ideas, the ones that really made a difference, always shared one fundamental trait.
Which was?
They enabled man to be worth more through producing more. That was his ultimate metric. Did it increase human productivity and potential? He saw the big technological race, the space race, science advancements, but he always brought it back to more fundamental questions about human well-being.
Right.
How much do people actually have to eat? How comfortably are they housed? And for him, maybe most importantly, what assurance of eternal life do they have through faith in Christ? He saw technology serving those bigger human needs.
Looking back when he was 71, writing some of these reflections, he clearly felt no desire whatsoever to slow down.
Not at all. Constantly balancing designing and building machines with traveling and speaking, carrying the word of God, as he put it. He called his whole life a miracle of God's grace.
When people credited his success just to his own intelligence, his own genius,
He'd push back gently. He'd say, well, God gave him the brains in the first place. He was also careful to credit his talented engineers, but then he'd thank God for sending them to him. It all came back to that partnership perspective.
he also spoke about his understanding of God's love and God creating humanity with the power to choose between good and evil. That free will was important to his theology.
The epilogue to the 1967 edition of the Sources, it brings his story forward from age 71 up to 78, just before his passing. And things kept growing, didn't they?
Phenomenally. His machines continued to get bigger 300-ton capacities mentioned. Offshore platforms became gigantic decks over 200 feet square, legs nearly 500 feet long. His workforce grew to almost 4,000 employees across the different plants.
And the LeTourneau Technical Institute.
It expanded significantly, too. Became a fully coeducational college, LeTourneau College, with a wide range of programs beyond just mechanics, including engineering, technology, arts, sciences. The campus grew substantially with new dorms, labs, a large library, other facilities.
And his personal ministry continued full force.
Absolutely. He
Right.
continued his passionate public witness, traveling constantly and extensively with Evelyn Mom, as everyone called her, sharing his story, his testimony, his faith, logging thousands upon thousands of miles by air, often piloting his own plane. He consistently credited Evelyn, by the way, for their children's strong faith.
His core testimony remained incredibly consistent throughout those later years, didn't it?
Unwavering. Always thankful God saved him as a teenager at 16, leading to that deeper commitment, that partnership decision around age 30. Always acknowledging that God had both prospered him incredibly, but also tested him significantly along the way.
He addressed that question of God's perceived partiality, didn't he? Why did God bless him so much?
Yeah, in a letter to a reader who asked that, LeTourneau wrote that ever since his full dedication around age 30, which some sources suggest came after the very difficult period where his young son passed away, although it's not explicitly linked in this text, he never questioned God's love or goodness.
He held fast to that belief.
Absolutely. He firmly believed that all things work together for good for those who love God, quoting Romans 8:28. That was his anchor.
He didn't seem to dwell in the past much, did he?
Not at all. Always saw yesterday mainly as preparation for today. He truly lived in the now, as the publication was named, remained excited, optimistic about the future, right up to the very end of his life.
His final months, March to June of 1969.
He was happy, at home mostly, Found his spirit lifted by singing old hymns with family and friends, favorites like Wonderful Grace of Jesus until then.
And even in his very final moments.
Amazing clarity. Said he never felt better. Confirmed clearly that he knew Jesus was the light, and then prompted his family for the lyrics to another hymn, There is Sunshine in My Soul Today. Shows his mind was sharp right to the end, focused on the things he felt truly endured.
His memorial service was apparently quite unusual for such a prominent industrialist.
Oh, so?
It was described as giving glory to God, first and foremost, contrasting with services that focus solely on the person's earthly accomplishments. His life is often held up as this rare example of someone who truly balanced phenomenal business success with deep, active Christian service.
Avoiding those common tendencies to neglect balance, either chasing success at all costs, or sometimes falling into a kind of spirituality that's detached from practical life.
Exactly. And his life and legacy, they continue today, most visibly through the university that bears his name, LeTourneau University now, still emphasizing not just technical training, but what he called the touch of engineering. That practical skill combined with the deeply held belief that every vocation is sacred when Christ lives in the life of the worker.
So wrapping this up, reflecting on R.G. LeTourneau's really extraordinary life, we've journeyed from this struggling, kind of rebellious kid through being a seriously debt-ridden entrepreneur on the brink of failure multiple times to ultimately becoming this global industrialist, an innovator known around the world.
And what drove all that? Underneath the inventions, the business deals, it was that truly unique and powerful sense of partnership with God.
Key themes just run right through his story, don't they? The sheer power of perseverance, learning from failure, and he had plenty of failures to learn from.
Absolutely. The ability of bold, unconventional innovation to solve massive, seemingly impossible problems, whether it was sticky mud or jungle trees or unstable seabeds.
And that deep conviction that business success and profound faith aren't just compatible, but that they can be mutually empowering, that they can be tools used together for the betterment of humanity.
LeTourneau didn't see his machines as separate from his faith at all. He really viewed them as tools for God's work. Transforming landscapes, sure, but in places like Liberia, hopefully transforming lives by improving basic living standards, creating opportunity. It's a powerful perspective on integrating your vocation and your core beliefs.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for you listening to this. Consider his approach. He faced immense technical challenges, huge business crises, painful personal setbacks, but he tackled them with this combination of radical innovation and an unwavering faith that saw his work, his engineering, his business as a calling.
So what does this all mean for you? Maybe consider how the pursuit of seemingly impossible solutions in your own life, whether they're technical challenges at work, business hurdles you're facing, or even deep personal struggles, how might approaching them be transformed?
Transformed if you see them not just as problems to be conquered through sheer grit, but maybe also as a calling to fulfill, something to think about.